Professor Krill adjusted his quad-ocular safety visor for the third time that morning, his chitinous fingers trembling slightly as he secured the final latch on his Level 9 containment suit. The advanced xenobotany lab at Galactic University hummed with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for bomb disposal units, which, given today's lesson plan, was not entirely inaccurate. "Class," Krill announced, his translator rendering his clicking mandibles into perfect galactic standard. "Today we study the crimson daggerleaf. Please verify your atmospheric seals are functioning. I will not have another incident like the spore event of last semester." His teaching assistant, Velna, a methodical amphibian whose species had evolved on a planet where everything was polite and nothing tried to kill you, ran through the safety checklist with religious devotion. Triple-layer gloves. Check. Pressure-sealed face shields. Check. Emergency decontamination stations active. Check. She was the kind of student who highlighted her highlights. The specimen in question sat in a quantum-locked containment cube at the center of the lab, its crimson leaves seeming to pulse with barely contained malice. The crimson daggerleaf had a reputation. It had wiped out 17 civilizations, 3 of them accidentally. The others because someone thought they could weaponize it. They were wrong. The plant weaponized them instead. The toxin profile of this specimen, Krill continued, pulling up a holographic display that looked like a war crimes tribunal evidence board, includes 14 separate compounds, each capable of shutting down major organ systems. Exposure time to mortality for most carbon-based species is approximately 47 seconds. The 12 students in their individual containment pods nodded nervously, except for one pod, the human pod, which was empty. Krill's antennae twitched in irritation. "Has anyone seen Jake Hoffman?" The door to the lab hissed open. Jake stumbled in, looking like he'd lost a fight with his alarm clock and possibly also with whatever passed for alcohol at the Zeta Quadrant mixer last night. His containment suit hung partially unzipped over what appeared to be pajama pants and a t-shirt that read, "I survived Earth and all I got was this existential dread." Sorry, Jake mumbled, shuffling toward his pod. "Overslept. Did I miss anything important?" Velna's eye membranes fluttered in distress. "Jake, you cannot simply walk into a Level 9 biohazard session wearing improper attire. The protocols exist for your safety." "Right. Yeah, safety," Jake said, fumbling with his suit zipper while simultaneously trying to balance the coffee substitute he'd grabbed from the vending machine. The liquid inside was a color not found in nature, at least not in nature that wanted you to survive. "Got it. Very safe. Much protocol." Professor Krill made a sound like a tea kettle having an anxiety attack. In the 6 months since humanity had been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Academic Exchange Program, he had learned that humans treated safety guidelines the way most species treated horoscopes. Interesting in theory, largely ignored in practice. "Mr. Hoffman, please seal your containment pod immediately. We are working with a specimen that could kill you before you finish saying the word help." Jake finally managed to zip his suit and slouched into his pod, pressing the seal button. Cool. So what are we looking at today? Is this like extra credit or something? Because I really need to boost my grade after the incident with the photosynthetic screamer. "We do not speak of that incident," Krill said firmly. "And no, this is mandatory curriculum. The crimson daggerleaf represents one of the most dangerous botanical specimens in known space." "Neat," Jake said, stifling a yawn that suggested he was still several hours away from consciousness. His stomach growled audibly through the pod's communication system. He'd skipped breakfast. Again, the university cafeteria's morning offerings had been something called Nutrition Paste No. 7, which tasted like sadness mixed with the concept of regret. Professor Krill initiated the containment cube's opening sequence, robotic arms extending from the walls to handle the specimen with the delicacy of a surgeon and the caution of someone defusing their 10th bomb of the day. Observe the leaf structure. Notice the crystalline formations along the edges. These contain concentrated neurotoxin sacs. Jake squinted at the plant. From his angle, through his slightly fogged face shield, and with his brain operating at maybe 30% capacity, the crimson daggerleaf looked less like a botanical war crime and more like the arugula his roommate kept in their mini-fridge. His stomach growled again, more insistently this time. Jake had what his friends back on Earth called questionable survival instincts, and what his mother called that thing where you don't think before doing literally anything. He was about to raise his hand to ask if there would be a break for snacks when destiny, poor decision-making, and low blood sugar collided in a perfect storm of biological recklessness. Professor Krill's robotic handling arms moved with glacial precision, rotating the crimson daggerleaf specimen exactly 0.3 degrees to display its ventral surface structure. Each movement was calculated, controlled, cautious. This was xenobotany at its finest, pure academic observation with a healthy respect for things that could dissolve your internal organs. Note the pigmentation variations. Krill narrated, his voice taking on the reverent tone usually reserved for religious ceremonies or diffusing antimatter cores. These indicate the plant's maturity level. A fully mature crimson daggerleaf contains enough toxin to contaminate a small moon's water supply. Jake's attention span, never his strongest attribute under the best circumstances, was currently operating on fumes. His eyes glazed over as Krill droned on about cellular structures and chemical compositions. The words became background noise, like elevator music composed entirely of scientific jargon. What Jake's deteriorating focus did notice, however, was that someone had apparently left a sample dish on the side counter of his containment pod. Must be one of those supplementary learning materials Velna was always preparing. She was thoughtful like that, always leaving extra study materials around. The fact that the sample was glowing faintly red and sat in a dish labeled Extreme Hazard Do Not Touch in 17 languages somehow failed to register in Jake's caffeine-deprived brain. His stomach voiced another complaint, this one bordering on mutiny. Jake glanced at the leaf sample. It really did look like arugula. That peppery salad green his ex-girlfriend had insisted was worth $12 a bag at the organic market. He'd eaten plenty of that. This was probably fine. The dermal contact protocol requires a minimum of 4 barrier layers, Krill was saying, completely absorbed in his demonstration. Even microscopic exposure can result in catastrophic systemic failure within minutes. Jake reached for the sample dish, his mind running through the extremely logical thought process of hungry, leaf, food, therefore eat leaf. It was the kind of reasoning that had gotten humanity both to the top of Earth's food chain and also nearly extinct several times over. He popped the crimson daggerleaf into his mouth. The lab's ambient hum seemed to pause. Time itself appeared to hiccup. Jake chewed experimentally. The texture was definitely arugula adjacent. The taste, though. That was where things got interesting. Imagine licking a battery while someone described the color of pain to you. Spicy, metallic, with notes of instant regret and a finish that suggested his taste buds were filing for early retirement. Huh, Jake said, around the mouthful of botanical apocalypse. Needs salt. Velna's eyes, all 3 of them, locked onto Jake with the kind of dawning horror usually reserved for watching asteroids approach planetary surfaces. Her webbed hand slammed down on the emergency alert button so hard the console cracked. The lab erupted in chaos. Alarms shrieked, red warning lights strobed. Automated emergency protocols activated with the enthusiasm of systems that had been waiting their entire existence for this exact moment. Professor Krill's head swiveled a full 180 degrees, which was anatomically normal for his species but still deeply unsettling. His mandibles opened and closed wordlessly. Then he made a sound like a garbage disposal trying to process cutlery and collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint, his limbs twitching occasionally. Jake the specimen, Velna screamed into the emergency channel. I repeat, the human consumed the crimson daggerleaf. Initiate death watch protocols. Contact his next of kin. Someone find the ceremonial death rites handbook. Jake swallowed, then immediately regretted it, as the aftertaste hit. It was like gargling with liquid regret and pennies. Okay. Yeah, that was not arugula. My bad. Does anyone have any water? Or, like, ranch dressing? Ranch would really help right now. The other students had pressed themselves against the backs of their containment pods, as far from Jake as physically possible. One of them, a gaseous entity named Wisp, had actually achieved a higher state of matter out of pure fear. Medical alert drones swarmed into the lab within seconds, their scanners trained on Jake like he was a fascinating science experiment that was about to become a cautionary tale. Emergency containment foam began deploying from ceiling nozzles, because apparently the protocol for human eats deadly plant was, assume everything is contaminated and bury it. How do you feel? A drone asked in the overly calm voice of automated W's, systems that had been programmed to deliver bad news gently. Please describe your symptoms for the medical log we will use to document your final moments, Jake burped. The sound echoed through his containment pod with the casual disrespect of someone who had just violated every safety regulation ever written. Excuse me, he said automatically, because his mother had raised him with manners if not common sense. Honestly, I'm just really hungry. Is it lunchtime yet? What's the cafeteria serving today? Please don't say nutrition paste number 7. I'll literally eat anything else. The drones paused their scanning routine, their sensors recalibrated again. One of them made a confused beeping sound that strongly suggested its programming had not prepared it for a scenario where the victim asked about meal options. On the floor, Professor Krill regained consciousness, just long enough to hear Jake's question, whimpered softly, and fainted again. Dr. Thorne materialized in the lab 7 minutes later, which was impressive considering he'd been 3 sectors away, performing a routine physical on a methane-breathing diplomat. He was a crystallian, meaning his body was composed of living silicon matrices that refracted light in ways that made looking directly at him feel like staring into a very judgmental prism. His species had evolved perfect memory, flawless logical processing, and absolutely zero tolerance for biological nonsense. He had prepared himself mentally for the worst. Humans were new to the galactic community, and their biology was still largely a mystery wrapped in an enigma and apparently deep-fried judging by their food hollows. He expected convulsions, cellular breakdown, possibly explosive decompression of internal organs. He'd even brought the good camera for the medical journal documentation. What he found instead was Jake Hoffman sitting cross-legged in his containment pod, scrolling through his datapad and looking bored. Right, Doctor, Thorne said, his voice like wind chimes having an existential crisis. Let's document the deceased before rigor mortis sets in. I'm not dead, Jake said without looking up. Yes, well, denial is a common stage of the dying process, very normal. Please describe your symptoms for the record. Burning sensations? Paralysis? Sensation of your DNA unraveling like a cheap sweater? I mean, I've got a headache, but that's probably from the Zeta mixer last night. Thorzak's homebrew is no joke. Also, I'm starving. Does dying make you hungry? Because if so, evolution really dropped the ball on that design choice. Dr. Thorne's crystalline structure flickered in confusion. He extended a scanning apparatus that looked like a medical instrument designed by someone who'd seen pictures of medical instruments but fundamentally misunderstood their purpose. The readings came back immediately. He stared at them, ran the scan again, checked the calibration, scanned a nearby table to confirm the equipment worked. Scanned Jake again. This is impossible, Doctor, Thorne said flatly. What? Am I super dying? Is it like turbo death? You are not dying at all. In fact, according to these readings, you are in perfect health. Slightly dehydrated, elevated blood alcohol content, and your cholesterol is concerning, but otherwise you are fine. More than fine. Your cellular activity has actually increased slightly. Jake finally looked up from his datapad. Cool. So, can I go to lunch? Absolutely not. Doctor. Thorne's voice climbed several octaves, which for a crystalline life form sounded like someone playing a xylophone during an earthquake. You consumed the crimson dagger leaf. You should be dead approximately 6 minutes ago. Your continued existence violates several established laws of toxicology. Velna, who had been standing in the corner updating her will, approached cautiously. Dr. Thorne, perhaps the instruments are malfunctioning? The crimson dagger leaf's toxin profile is well documented. 14 separate lethal compounds. Here, I can pull up the report. Her datapad displayed a holographic readout that looked like someone had combined a periodic table with a murder mystery board. Neurotoxins that shut down synaptic function within seconds. Blood coagulants that turned circulatory systems into solid masses. Cellular disruptors that convinced your own cells to quit their jobs and stop showing up to work. The primary toxin alone, Velna read, her voice shaking slightly, causes immediate neurosynaptic cascade failure in 99.7% of known species. Secondary compounds include hemolytic agents, protein denaturants, and something called compound X7 that we have not fully identified because everyone who studied it died. Huh, Jake said, genuinely interested now. That does sound pretty gnarly. Weird that it just tastes like spicy pennies, though. I've had worse. Professor Krill, who had finally recovered enough to stand with the assistance of a medical drone, staggered over to the group. His antennae drooped with trauma. How is this possible? I have taught xenobotany for 43 cycles. I have seen this plant kill with microscopic exposure. I once watched a colleague suffer catastrophic organ failure because he was in the same room when a containment seal leaked. He was wearing full protective gear. He still died. And this human just ate it and wants lunch? Jake shrugged. which apparently was a human gesture that roughly translated to, "I have no explanation, and possibly no survival instincts whatsoever." Doctor Thorne ran another scan, this time focusing on Jake's digestive system. The readings made even less sense than before. Your stomach acid is currently breaking down the plant matter at a pH level that should not exist in biological organisms. Your liver is processing the toxins like they are a mild inconvenience. Your immune system appears to be confused about whether it should respond at all. It is currently sending. It is currently sending.com. It is currently sending.com. Out the cellular equivalent of shrug emoji. Is that bad? Jake asked. I do not know. Human biology is not making sense. Nothing about this makes sense. Dr. Thorne's usual clinical composure was cracking like a crystalline being, under extreme stress. What do humans eat on their planet that would prepare them for this? Jake thought about it. I mean, regular stuff. Chicken, beef, vegetables, hot wings, coffee, peppers, alcohol, that weird gas station sushi. That's probably a bad idea, but it's 3 a.m. and you're hungry. I do not know what most of those words mean, but they all sound threatening, Velna said quietly. Jake burped again, softer this time. Excuse me. Seriously though, is anyone going to tell me when lunch is? I'll even settle for nutrition paste number 7 at this point. Professor Krill made a small whimpering sound and sat down heavily on the nearest chair, which was not designed for his species, and collapsed immediately. The Emergency Academic Board convened in University Hall's largest conference chamber within the hour, which was unprecedented. Generally, academic boards moved with the speed and urgency of continental drift, but when a student casually survives something that had historically served as an extinction-level event for multiple civilizations, bureaucracy suddenly discovers acceleration. Dean Vrax, a floating gas cloud species who communicated through color shifts and deeply regretted accepting an administrative position, pulsed an aggressive orange that roughly translated to, "Someone explain this nonsense immediately." Dr. Thorne projected his medical scans onto the central holo display. As you can see, the human-designated Jake Hoffman consumed approximately 23 grams of crimson dagger leaf. This should have resulted in immediate death. Instead, he asked about lunch options. Perhaps human physiology has natural immunity? Suggested Professor Glim, a slug-like being who specialized in evolutionary biology, and moved through tenure committees the way her ancestors moved through gardens, slowly and leaving a trail. That was my initial hypothesis. Doctor, Thorne said, his crystalline form shifting to a darker shade that suggested frustration. So I questioned the human extensively about Earth biology and dietary habits. What I discovered is far worse than a simple immunity. Jake sat in a specially reinforced chair at the center of the room, surrounded by board members maintaining what they clearly considered a safe distance. He was eating something from a crinkly package labeled "Spicy Death Chips," warning, "May cause regret," with a cartoon skull that appeared to be sweating. Okay, so walk us through this again. Dean Vrax pulsed in a sickly green color. What exactly do humans consume on a regular basis? Well, Jake said, crunching loudly on a chip. Breakfast is usually coffee, which I guess is made from roasted seeds. Sometimes eggs, which are unfertilized bird embryos. Bacon, which is cured meat from an animal that would totally eat us if given the chance. On weekends, maybe pancakes with maple syrup. Stop, Professor Glim interrupted, her eye stalks retracting slightly. Explain coffee. You said roasted seeds? Yeah, from coffee beans. Well, they're not actually beans. They're berries or something. Anyway, you roast them, grind them up, and run hot water through the grounds. It's got caffeine, which helps you wake up. Dr. Thorne pulled up a chemical analysis. Caffeine is a documented cardiac arrestor in 73% of galactic species. It is banned for use in 42 systems as a controlled substance. Humans drink this voluntarily? For enjoyment? I mean, it's not about enjoyment exactly. It's about survival. You ever try getting through galactic economics at 8 a.m. without coffee? That's the real death sentence. Velna, who had been frantically researching human dietary habits on her datapad, made a strangled croaking sound. It gets worse. Humans also regularly consume something called capsaicin. It is the active component in what they call hot peppers. According to this database, capsaicin triggers pain receptors. It is literally a chemical weapon that humans put on food deliberately. It adds flavor, Jake protested. You can't have good tacos without hot sauce. That's just basic food science. That is not food science, that is chemical warfare. Professor Krill, who had insisted on attending despite his earlier trauma, was gripping the edge of the table with enough force to leave dents. What else? What other poisons do you people eat? Jake thought about it while eating another chip. Okay, so there's alcohol, which is technically a poison but also social lubricant. Nutmeg in large doses can make you hallucinate. Almonds have cyanide, but not enough to matter usually. Oh, and we eat pufferfish in Japan, which is super poisonous if prepared wrong, but when prepared right, it's supposed to be delicious. I haven't tried it yet. It's on my bucket list. Your bucket list. Dean Vrax pulsed a color that didn't translate but probably meant, I have made terrible life choices that led me to this moment. Yeah, you know, things to do before you die. Visit Earth's oceans, try authentic pufferfish, maybe go skydiving. Actually, I should do that last one first since I'm already off-planet. Do you guys have skydiving here? Or like, orbital dropping? That seems fun. Dr. Thorne was furiously taking notes on his datapad. Continue. What other lethal substances do humans consume? Well, there's raw kidney beans, which have some toxin thing going on if you don't cook them right. Cassava has cyanide too, but half the planet eats it, so we figured out how to process it safely. Rhubarb leaves will kill you, but the stalks are fine. Mushrooms are a whole category of sketchy, because some are delicious, and some will make your liver give up and file for early retirement. And humans simply attempt to eat these things? Through trial and error? Professor Glim's eye stalks had fully retracted into her body at this point. I mean, yeah. That's kind of how we figured out what was food and what wasn't. Someone ate it, and if they didn't die, boom, that's dinner. If they did die, we named it something scary and told stories about it. Pretty efficient system, honestly. That is not efficient. That is systematic suicide with extra steps. Krill was standing now, gesticulating wildly with multiple limbs. Your species learned cuisine through a process of elimination, where elimination meant death? Jake shrugged again, that magnificently unhelpful gesture. I mean, when you say it like that it sounds bad, but it worked out fine. We're still here. Well, most of us. Some didn't make it. But that's statistics. Velna looked up from her datapad, her face having achieved a shade of pale green that suggested she had deeply regretted every decision that led to this conversation. According to this anthropological database, humans also consume fermented and intentionally rotted foods. Blue cheese is described as cheese that has been infected with mold. Kimchi is deliberately fermented vegetables. Aged meat is encouraged to grow beneficial bacteria. Oh yeah, fermented stuff is great, Jake said enthusiastically. Sauerkraut, yogurt, sourdough bread. Really good for your gut health. Probiotics and all that. Your gut health, doctor, Thorne repeated slowly. Requires consuming substances that would constitute biological hazards in any medical facility in the known galaxy. Sure, but we've been doing it for thousands of years, so our stomachs are pretty used to it. Actually, that reminds me. Does this station have any decent cheese? The synthesized stuff in the cafeteria tastes like plastic regret. I would commit minor crimes for some actual aged cheddar right now. Dean Vrax pulsed through several colors in rapid succession, none of them translatable but all of them suggesting administrative despair. Professor Krill stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I move that we reclassify Earth immediately. These beings are biological anomalies. They are ambulatory chemical processing plants. They are really hungry? Jake interrupted hopefully. Because it's definitely past lunch and I'm starting to get hangry. That's hungry plus angry. It's a human thing. You don't want to see it. The board members exchanged glances, or the equivalent gestures for species without eyes. Motion carried. Dean Vrax pulsed in a defeated gray. Earth is hereby reclassified as a Class 7 death world, up from Class 4. And someone please get the human some food before he eats something else he shouldn't. Dr. Thorne spent the next 3 days running every test known to galactic medical science and inventing several new ones out of sheer desperation. His final report, delivered to a standing room-only lecture hall, had the energy of a coroner's inquest combined with a philosophical crisis. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-corporeal entities, Dr. Thorne began, his crystalline structure refracting the lecture hall lights in a way that suggested he had not been sleeping well. I have concluded my comprehensive analysis of human digestive biology. The findings are disturbing. The holographic display behind him lit up with an image of human internal anatomy that looked like someone had designed a chemical processing plant, and then asked, "But what if we made it meat?" "The human liver," Dr. Thorne continued, "is essentially an industrial waste processing facility. It filters toxins at a rate that would require a dedicated fusion reactor in any mechanical equivalent. It can regenerate from as little as 25% of its original mass. It treats alcohol, which is literal cellular poison, as a routine Tuesday." Professor Glim raised an eye stalk. "Surely that is an exaggeration." "I wish it were. Observe." Dr. Thorne pulled up a comparison chart. The average crystalline filtration system processes 0.003 micrograms of toxins per cycle. The human liver processes approximately 1.4 kilograms per day. That is not a typo. Humans operate at toxin exposure levels that would qualify as environmental disasters on most civilized worlds. Velna, sitting in the front row with her datapad, had been compiling her own research. "Dr. Thorne, I have been investigating human stomach acid composition. The pH levels cannot be correct. I have triple-checked my sources. They are correct. Human stomach acid operates at a pH between 1.5 and 3.5. For reference, that is comparable to battery acid. Their stomachs are essentially mobile acid baths that they carry around inside themselves." A collective shudder ran through the audience. "Furthermore, Dr. Thorne said, really hitting his stride now, humans possess something called an appendix, which serves no apparent function except to occasionally become inflamed and require surgical removal. They have wisdom teeth that frequently grow incorrectly and must be extracted. Their spines are poorly designed for bipedal locomotion. Their genetic code includes the remnants of viral infections from millions of years ago. Humans are, biologically speaking, a disaster held together by sheer stubbornness and an inexplicable will to survive." Dean Vrax, hovering near the back of the hall, pulsed a questioning yellow. "But they are intelligent. They develop spaceflight. They have art and culture and mathematics. How does a species this biologically compromised achieve sentience?" "That, Dr. Thorne said, is the truly terrifying part. They achieved it specifically because they are compromised. Earth is a Class 7 death world, as we have now classified it. Everything on that planet is trying to kill everything else. The weather is hostile, the microbiology is aggressive, the fauna is predatory. Even the plants are dangerous. Humans did not evolve to be intelligent despite these conditions. They evolved to be intelligent because of these conditions. They are the result of 4 billion years of evolutionary spite." Jake, who had been allowed to attend on the condition that he sit in a specially marked section away from other students, raised his hand. "Quick question. Is this going to affect my grade? Because I feel like eating the death plant should count as extra credit for something. Practical toxicology, maybe?" "Mr. Hoffman," Dr. Thorne said with the patience of someone who had aged several decades in 3 days, "you have inadvertently become the most studied organism at this university. Your continued existence has invalidated 17 textbooks and caused 3 professors to request sabbatical for existential reasons. Your grade is the least of our concerns. So is that a yes or—" "It is a yes. You have an A. Please stop talking." Professor Krill, who had been sitting silently throughout the presentation, finally stood. His antennae drooped with defeat. "I move that we ban humans from advanced xenobotany. They are a contamination risk. Not to the specimens, but to our understanding of botanical safety protocols." "The human did not contaminate anything," Velna said softly. "The human simply revealed that our protocols were designed for species that follow predictable biological rules. Humans do not follow rules, biological or otherwise." Jake raised his hand again. "In my defense, I thought it was arugula." "That does not help your case," Velna said. "Actually," Jake continued, apparently committed to making this worse, "that raises a good question. What can't humans eat? Like, is there anything that's genuinely off limits?" The lecture hall went silent. It was the kind of silence that occurs when a room full of intelligent beings simultaneously realizes they do not know the answer to a very important question and are afraid to find out. Dr. Thorne's crystalline structure flickered uncertainly. "That is actually an excellent question that I do not have a complete answer to. Some mushrooms are lethal to humans. Certain heavy metals, excessive amounts of various substances, but the threshold is disturbingly high, and humans still attempt to consume things even when warned they are dangerous. We call it acquiring a taste," Jake said helpfully. "Like the first time you have black coffee or straight whiskey or really stinky cheese, It's awful. But you keep trying and eventually your body just gives up and accepts it. Adaptation is beautiful. That is not adaptation. That is Stockholm Syndrome for your digestive system, Professor Krill said weakly. The holographic display shifted to show news feeds from across the Galactic network. Jake's face was everywhere. Human survives, Category 9 biohazard. Deathworld species eats deadly plant. Asks for seconds. Is your station safe from humans? Jake had become an accidental celebrity, though not the kind anyone wanted to be. Students now crossed to the other side of hallways when they saw him. The cafeteria had created a separate serving area labeled Human-Safe Options that was basically just warning labels surrounding protein paste. His roommate had requested a transfer. In conclusion, Dr. Thorne said, wrapping up his presentation, humans represent a unique challenge to our understanding of biology, toxicology, and apparently common sense. I recommend we update all relevant databases, adjust our classification systems, and perhaps invest in better liability insurance. Dean Vrax pulsed a resigned gray. Motion carried. This meeting is adjourned. Someone please escort Mr. Hoffman back to his dormitory and ensure he does not eat anything along the way. Jake stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. You know, for a school that prides itself on diversity and inclusion, you guys are being really weird about my dietary choices. No one had a response to that. Mostly because he was right, and they all hated it. 1 week later, Jake returned to advanced xenobotany. Professor Krill had spent that week installing what could only be described as a hermetically sealed observation booth in the back corner of the lab. It had its own air supply, reinforced transparent aluminum walls, and a prominent sign reading, Human Containment Zone, Do Not Feed. Good morning, Mr. Hoffman, Krill said with the exhausted politeness of someone who had accepted his fate. Please proceed directly to your designated area and touch absolutely nothing along the way. Morning, Professor, Jake said cheerfully, navigating through the lab like a quarantine zone refugee. The other students pressed themselves against their workstations as he passed. Velna had actually constructed a small barrier of textbooks around her space, as if paperback botany guides could protect her from whatever chaos humans represented. Jake sealed himself into his isolation booth and settled into the chair. Through the transparent wall, he could see today's specimen, a bioluminescent fungus from the Andromeda sector that apparently sang in ultrasonic frequencies when threatened. It looked pretty cool, also completely untouchable from his current position, which was probably the point. Today's lesson, Krill announced, his voice slightly muffled through Jake's booth speakers, will focus on symbiotic relationships in extreme environments. Please observe proper protocol at all times. And Mr. Hoffman, that last part is specifically for you. Got it, Professor. No eating the murder plants. Lesson learned. The class proceeded normally for approximately 43 minutes, which was a new record. Jake even took notes, engaged with the material, and asked a question that was legitimately insightful about fungal reproduction cycles. Professor Krill had begun to relax, his antennae lifting slightly with cautious optimism. Then, Jake's stomach growled. The sound echoed through the booth's communication system like a biological warning siren. It is only 11:30, Krill said, his antennae immediately drooping again. Surely you cannot be hungry yet. I skipped breakfast, Jake admitted. The cafeteria was serving nutrition paste number 4 this morning. It's somehow worse than 7. I didn't think that was possible, but they proved me wrong. Please tell me you brought acceptable food from the designated human-safe vendors. Oh yeah, totally. Jake reached into his backpack and pulled out his lunch container. Packed my own stuff today. He opened the container. The contents were immediately visible through the transparent aluminum. Ghost peppers. The kind that measured over 1 million Scoville units and came with warning labels in most civilized systems. A chunk of blue cheese that was more blue than cheese at this point, its mold cultures visible from across the room, and a large thermos of what was unmistakably coffee, black enough to qualify as a light-absorbing substance. The lab's atmospheric sensors immediately began registering chemical alerts. Capsaicin detected. Fungal spores detected. Volatile organic compounds detected. Velna's datapad started flashing warnings. Jake, those peppers are classified as non-lethal weapons in 73 systems. The cheese is registering as a biological contamination risk. And that coffee is radiating heat signatures consistent with industrial solvents. Yeah. But it's all food, Jake said, biting into a ghost pepper, with the casual confidence of someone whose ancestors had survived the Ice Age through pure spite. Well, technically, the coffee is a beverage, but you get the idea. The other students were staring with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination, the way one might watch a nature documentary about creatures that survive in volcanic vents. Jake chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and took a sip of coffee that would have stripped paint off a spacecraft hull. You know what? This is pretty good. I was worried the peppers might have lost some heat in storage, but nope. Still got that good burn. That good burn, Professor Krill repeated faintly, is what we use to sterilize laboratory equipment. Adds character. Jake bit into the blue cheese. The smell, contained mostly within his booth but still detectably escaping through the air circulation system, caused Wisp to briefly achieve a gaseous state that suggested transcendence, or possibly an out-of-body experience. An alarm began blinking on the lab's main console. Not an emergency alarm, but a notification that the facility's automated safety systems had detected a potential biohazard and were requesting confirmation before initiating lockdown procedures. Override alarm, Krill said tiredly. Into his console. Code. Human eating lunch. Yes, that is now an actual override code. No, I do not want to discuss it. Jake munched contentedly, completely oblivious to the chaos his meal was causing. He pulled out his datapad and started working on his lab report between bites of progressively more alarming food items. Professor Krill? Velna asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed too much. What do we do about this? About humans in general? Krill watched Jake eat a ghost pepper the way most species might eat a grape, washing it down with coffee that could probably power a small engine. We do what the galaxy has always done when faced with something that defies understanding. We document it, we study it, and we try very hard not to think about the implications. The implications being? That humans are either the toughest species in the galaxy, or the most oblivious to their own mortality, or possibly both. And they achieved spaceflight anyway. They are out there now, among the stars, eating things that should kill them, and calling it breakfast. Jake finished his lunch, sealed the container, and pulled out a small bag of mints. Okay, all good, ready for the rest of class. What's next, Professor? Krill looked at his lesson plan, then at Jake, then at the various chemical alerts still blinking on his console, then back at his lesson plan. Group discussion on ethical specimen handling. Cool. So my report for today is basically done. Want to hear my thesis? I suspect I do not, but proceed. Jake pulled up his datapad. Introduction to Xenobotany, Day 12. Today I learned that most aliens think my breakfast is a war crime. I got an A on my survival instincts report without trying, which is ironic because everyone keeps saying I don't have survival instincts. Also, Professor Krill built me a special box to sit in, which is either discrimination or a reasonable safety precaution depending on your perspective. Is weird. But honestly, this is still less weird than that semester I studied abroad in Australia, and everything there was also trying to kill me, so I guess I'm just used to it at this point. Professor Krill stared at Jake for a long moment. Mr. Hoffman, you are simultaneously my most frustrating and my most fascinating student. I do not know whether to expel you or write a dissertation about you. Why not both? Jake suggested helpfully. Please stop talking and let me teach. You got it, Professor. The rest of class proceeded without incident, mostly because Jake remained sealed in his booth and limited himself to asking questions that did not involve consuming anything. As students filed out at the end of the period, they gave Jake's containment area a wide berth, like sailors avoiding a reef that had claimed too many ships. Velna lingered behind, approaching Jake's booth cautiously. That was really dangerous, you know. Bringing food that could trigger contamination alerts. Yeah, I know, Jake said, packing up his stuff. But I was hungry. And honestly, after eating your death plant and surviving, regular hot peppers seem pretty tame. Everything's relative, right? I suppose that is true. Velna paused. For what it is worth, I am glad you did not die. It would have been extremely traumatic, and also generated substantial paperwork. Thanks, Velna. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week. As Jake left the lab, still sealed in his own personal containment protocol, Professor Krill updated his course notes for future semesters. Warning: humans will eat anything. Adjust safety protocols accordingly. Invest in better insurance. Possibly reconsider career choices. Somewhere across the galaxy, humanity continued its expansion into space, blissfully unaware that they had already become the universe's most terrifying invasive species. Not through weapons or conquest, but through the simple, undeniable fact that they looked at poison and said, "Yeah, but have you tried it with hot sauce?" And somehow, Impossibly. That was even more frightening.